I want you to notice this chart. It points out to us the United Kingdom goes from 1 Samuel chapter 8 to until 1 Kings chapter 11. The divided kingdom lasts from 1 Kings chapter 12 through 2 Kings chapter 17. Then we have Judah alone, since the northern tribes have went into captivity in 2 Kings 17, all the way up to 2 Kings 25, until they go into Babylonian captivity for 70 years. And then Ezra chapter 1 and Nehemiah, we hear about the return from captivity. Very important chart to understand as you study the Old Testament. There are the prophets listed, when they prophesied, who they were prophesying to, basically, the divided kingdom, captivity, and the return. The United Kingdom is where we are in this study. We're actually with our last lesson from the book of 1 Samuel, and here's kind of an overview from Bible projects of the two books. They used to be combined. The two arcs represent the life of Saul, we're going to see come to an end in this lesson, and David, his life. 1 Samuel at a glance. We're in the last section, the third transition, here it is, of leadership from Saul to David. Now the kings, as we have seen here, we see Saul's reign from 1050 to 1010 before the Common Era. We have David going from 2 Samuel chapter 2 to 1 Kings chapter 2, and the date of that is 1010 to 970. Solomon begins his reign, 1 Kings chapter 3, all the way through 1 Kings chapter 11, 970 to 930. Shortly after that, his son Rehoboam comes on the scene, and that's when we get into the divided kingdom. Here is a chart of the fall of Saul and the rise of David in 1 Samuel. We begin chapter 16 when the Holy Spirit is removed, that is, God leaves Saul, and an evil spirit is given. We see in chapter 18 the jealousy and treachery, the attempts to kill David. Failed holy warrior he is. And the kingdom torn away finally in 1 Samuel 15, verse 11. All this we have studied in previous lessons. You can go back and watch those lessons if you'd like. They're in our archives, both on Rumble and on YouTube. Saul's decline that we have seen to this point. A presumptuous sacrifice caused a loss of kingdom, of his kingdom being foretold. We see this in 1 Samuel 13, verse 14. And then he issues a foolish curse. The curse falls on Jonathan about eating. And that's in chapter 14, verse 24 and 44. And then he spares King Agag, which that is the final blow when he spares King Agag from the Amalekites and the flocks. And so that causes a loss of kingdom. And we need to add one more to this decline, the loss of fellowship with God as seen in 1 Samuel 28 and in verse 6. And then the last one we studied was his visiting a medium from Endor, and his doom is predicted by another other than Samuel, who he had this medium conjure up in 1 Samuel 28 and in verse 19. Our chart that we've referred to, and here's the last section we're in, the death of King Saul. So with that, we begin our study of 1 Kings 29, verse 31. The country, the land of the Philistines, we see to the left side on this chart. And of course, that's where David is at this point. And so David is right now, and King Saul is the king of Israel. David's here in his own city, little city. The king has given him called Ziklag. And let's see if I zoom in on Ziklag right there, you see. He is living there to keep from going to battle and killing Saul. The Philistines are wanting to do battle with Israel in the north. King Saul wants to know whether he should go to war or not. And of course, we know God is not answering him anymore. And this is what led him to go to the medium. And so we're seeing the continuing decline, the final decline in this section we're studying, chapter 28, verse 3 through 31, verse 13, his final decline. And we start off with it today in verse 20, in chapter 29, David and Achish. This is another individual king. He's going to do battle, to help in battle, or supposedly that's what this king thinks anyway. And we get this idea, enemies are people too. We lose sight on that. We think we get into this idea of we just have to massacre, we have to conquer, that they're bad to the core. But we learn they're people. I see I put two E's on that, but that's kind of the way it is. So with that, let's begin reading this section in 1 Samuel 29, beginning in verse 1. Now the Philistines had gathered all their forces at Aphek, and the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. As the Lord of the Philistines were passing on by, hundreds by thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear of Achish. The Philistines are heading to go to do battle with Saul. King David is going to go with them. With him going up, what kind of predicament does that put him in? He can't say no. They believe David has defected from Israel. And so they say, come. David says, okay, I'll go. The commanders of the Philistines said, what are these Hebrews doing here? Achish said to the commander of the Philistines, is this not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel, who has been with me now for days and years? And since he deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day. But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him, and the commanders of the Philistines said, send the man back, that he may return to the place to which you have assigned him. He shall not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he becomes an adversary to us. For how could this fellow, watch what he says, how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of the men here? He says David's going to turn on us. And he says, is this not David, of whom they sing to one another in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And so with verse 6, we're going to begin to see dealing with disappointment. Verse 6, then Achish called David and said to him, as the Lord lives, you have been honest. And to me it seems right that you should march out in with me in the campaign. For I have found nothing wrong in you from the day of your coming to me to this day. Nevertheless, the Lords do not approve of you. So go back now. Go peaceably, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines. And David said to Achish, but what have I done? What have you found in your servant from the day I entered your service until now, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my Lord the king? And we find Achish answered David and said, I know that you are blameless in my sight as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines have said, he shall not go up with us to battle. Now then, rise early in the morning with the servants of your Lord who came with you, and start early in the morning and depart as soon as you have light. So David sent out with his men early in the morning. He set out with them to return to the land of the Philistines, but the Philistines went up. You can see Jezreel, and you can see the area they're going up into. If you'll look off to the left up there, you'll notice off to the left, and I can't do that, off to the left you see Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel, some people call that. And this is a topographical map, so you'll see the elevation that you climb getting to the Valley of Jezreel. And so that gives you, there's Mount Gilboa. We'll talk about a little later in this study. And here will help us see Mount Carmel. And there you'll look real close. Right, let's see if I do this. The Valley of Jezreel. And then, of course, here's some, to give you an idea, the area that we were in, this map should show you that. So now we get into revenge for a haven destroyed. The Amalekites, they came in and burned the city, took all the women and children hostage. They're going to take all the wealth and spoils. They didn't kill anyone. History shows they were mean, ugly vagabonds. They go around and showed no mercy. They were a nation of robbers. Now, here it is. It says, now when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negev and against Ziklag. And they had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire. And then we learn, verse 2, they had taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. So as we said, they go around, showed no mercy. They were a nation of robbers. Now, this map shows us the kingdom of David. And you see these various towns that we're getting ready to speak of here. There's Ramah that we're going to be talking about, and Bethel is in that area. So here they are. Verse 27, I think, is where we are. Let's see. There's the towns that as we want to see here. So not 27. Here it is. So we're going to find strength in God. Verse 3, dealing with disaster, finding strength with God. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire and their wives and sons and daughters taken. And so I asked the question, what would you do? You sit down and say, it'll turn out okay, get a night's sleep. If you went out of the town for a while, came back, and the house is burned, your wife and children not there, what would you do? You say, okay, well, we can get another wife, we can have some more children. But put yourself in their position. They're warriors. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to go and, if possible, rescue those people. Verse 4, David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength. How many cried till they had no more strength? Will, in your life, at some point, you might do that. You're in deep, deep, horrible grief. They're not sissies. They're not women. Hardcore elements of his army. Small group than those who had deserted Saul. skilled men, breaking down in tears. Verse 5, David's 2 wives also had been taken captive. Who were they? Anomi of Jezreel, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul. That's what happens when when you're in grief. You say, well, why did it happen? Why didn't this death happen to this person? Why do you have to take this person? Well, this is where they are with this grief, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord. So why stone David? Well, who always gets the blame? The leader. In the football team, who do we always blame? Who always gets fired? The head coach. In the country, who gets blamed? It's the president's fault. And in 4 years, generally, if we don't like the president, we have a chance to elect another one that we'll soon not like. We just got through with an election, didn't we? Here, if you're watching this in 2024, turned out really a surprise. But the Lord is still in charge. And if this President Trump doesn't do like he's promised and like we think, we can always elect another. Don't want to get too political here, but the idea, you see the idea, it's always taken out on the leaders. David said to Abiathar, the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. So Abiathar brought the ephod to David. Now, this I want you to see. If you will look at this priest, representation of a high priest, that piece that's on his chest there, that's the Urim and Thummim. You see all those buttons there, those lights. There's lights that are used in some way. Now, how they they light up. I'm not saying they're actual lights like we have. Don't really know how that worked. Miraculous means. And that piece about the same color that looks like a girdle around his waist, that's the ephod. So I wanted you to see what we're talking about when we're talking about these garments, the Urim and Thummim and the ephod. So there's the Urim and Thummim close up. And David inquired of the Lord, shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake them? He answered, pursue, for you shall surely overtake and shall surely rescue. The Lord tells him. So David set out. The 600 men who were with him, they came to the brook Beshor, where those who were left behind stayed. But David pursued, he and 400 men, 200 men stayed behind, who were too exhausted to cross the brook. And so the disastrous effects of complacency is going to be shown. So they find an Egyptian in the open country and brought him to David, and they gave him bread and he ate, and they gave him water and he drank. And they gave him a piece of cake, a cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirits revived, for he had not eaten bread or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. David said to him, to whom do you belong? And where are you from? And he said, I'm a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite, and my master left me behind because I fell sick 3 days. We had made a raid against the Negev of the Cherethites and against that which belongs to Judah and against the Negev of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. So here are these regions once again that we're talking about. There's the Negev, the southern portion, all across there to the Mediterranean. Now, Negev simply means south. And so he says here in verse 27, to those who were in Bethel, those who were in Ramah of the south. So there you see these places. This may help you a little more with these places. You got more of the cities there. There's Ziklag, and all these different places that you're going to see. So verse 15, David said to him, will you take me down to this man? He said, swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will take you down to this man. And when he had taken him down, behold, they were spread abroad over all the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because all the great spoil that they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. And David struck them down from twilight until the evening of the next day. Not a man of them escaped except 400 young men who mounted camels and fled. They got out. So now let's look at the importance of sharing any God-given spoils. Verse 18. David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken. David rescued his 2 wives. So nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoils, or anything that had been taken. David got it all back, brought it all back. He also captured all the flocks and herds. The people drove the livestock before him and said, this is David's spoil. David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow David and who had been left at the brook. And they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And when David came near to the people, he greets them. All the wicked and worthless fellows among the men who had gone with David said, because they did not go with us, we will not go with them, give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except that each man may lead away his wife and children. The ones that didn't go, they can depart. You know, you didn't participate, you don't get any spoils. David said, you shall not do so, my brothers, with what the Lord has given us. He has preserved us and given into our hands the band that came against us. Who would listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down into the battle, so shall his share be who stayed by the baggage. They shall share alike. So the people with David didn't want to give them any, but David said, everybody gets a share. That's only fair. And he made it a statute and a rule for Israel from that day forward to this day. So you didn't have to be in the battle to get part of the spoil. Then David came to Ziklag. We've already seen a couple times where Ziklag is, so I hope you have that in your mind. He sent part of the spoil to his friends, the elders of Judah, saying, here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. So there again is Ziklag. In the center there is Simeon, actually. You see the tribe of Simeon there that's in camp. You know, it's right inside of Judah, we see, right there. So verse 27, it was for those in Bethel and Ramah of the Negev in Jitter, in Ara, in Sephmoth, in Estimo, in Rakal, in the cities of Jerahmeelites, in the cities of the Kenites, in Homa, in Borash, in Atat, in Hebron, for all the peoples where David and his men had roamed. The people that allowed him to go through their land, he's sharing with them. Now in chapter 31, I want you to notice chapter 31, we have the defeat and death in the north. Yes, we're finally going to get into the death of Saul. So where's the king of the Philistines headed? Remember, he's coming to do battle. Now, we took a side shoot and we looked at David's exploits in getting the women back. Now, in parallel time, not sequential like the Bible's written, parallel time, this battle's taking place. So let's see this battle now, chapter 31. In chapter 31, I didn't mean to get these parallels in there, but we've got them. Here's the parallels between, we have some overlapping here. And so now let's look at life and death decisions. And I do want you to see these areas before we get to the reading. First of all, we ditch this. We have the Philistines are heading north along the coast. We see the coastal plain. And then they turn into the valley of Jezreel. You see this on this chart. Camping at Shunem, there's Shunem. They plan an attack in the heart of Israel. The next thing we see that happens is Saul's troop camp at Mount Gilboa, a good defensive position, really. And Saul is terrified now at the size of the Philistine army. He's unable to get any guidance from God about what to do. Now, this is coming up to this battle where we're getting the details here. Despite his own prohibition of mediums and fortune tellers in Israel, Saul goes by night to consult a medium in Endor, thinking he's going to hear from Samuel, and Samuel is going to give him news about how to handle the battle. But what happens, we know, when Samuel is brought up, Samuel tells him, tomorrow you and your sons are going to be where I am. Of course, that's the Hadean realm as we study in Luke chapter 16. I'd invite you to go over and study that, and you'll see exactly what we're talking about, Abraham's bosom in this case. So that's what we have here. The Philistines attack. Now they're going to attack at Gilboa. The Israelites are going to be put to flight. There's what we'll see there. And Saul is going to kill himself, and his son Jonathan is also killed. David's going to sing a lament for Saul and Jonathan, 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 17. So let's see all this in action in chapter 31. In verse 1, the Philistines were fighting against Israel. The men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons. The Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Saul said to his armor-bearer, draw your sword, thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me. He didn't want to be alive in the hands of the Philistines. And so let's look what the archer does. His armor-bearer, would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. Now watch that. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, his 3 sons, his armor-bearer, all his men on the same day together. Saul and the armor-bearer, they commit suicide. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul, his sons, were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and lived in them. So now we have desecration of the dead, even of the bodies of the enemies. That's always an offense. So it happened the next day when the Philistines came to strip the slain. Say, desecration of the dead bodies, that's bad. They found Saul, his 3 sons, fallen on Mount Gilboa. So they cut off his head, stripped off his armor, sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news, that'd be their gospel, to the house of their idols and to their people. Saul's decline and fall. What we have seen thus far, the presumptive sacrifice, a foolish curse. He spared Agag and the flocks. He lost fellowship with God. God did not answer his prayers any longer. He visited a medium going against his own decree. And in that time, of course, Samuel said, "You'll be with me tomorrow. You and your sons will be where I am," the Hadean realm. And then finally, he takes his own life and ends the dynasty, chapter 31, verse 4 and 6. Now, verse 10. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth. They fastened his body to the wall at Bethshan. But when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men rose, went all night, took the body of Saul and the bodies of his son from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. That's what they did. In verse 13, they took their bones, buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh, and fasted 3 days. Now that's the end of our study of the book of 1 Samuel. Our next lesson, we will be taking up this story from 2 Samuel. We'll be studying 2 Samuel, so I hope you join with us in that study and get this lesson wherever. Tell your friends about this study. We'll be glad to have you, be glad to hear from you. And with that, cheerio, mate. Bob's your uncle. If you found this video helpful and want to learn more, be sure you write for our free 4-lesson Bible correspondence course. We here at the Spring Hill Church of Christ want to help you grow in your knowledge of the Word of God. Also remember, we are in it for the likes and subs, so be sure you subscribe, like us, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and or Twitter, what they now call X, and Rumble. Don't forget Rumble. So with that, thanks for watching or listening. And in the meantime, in between time, we will see you next time. Cheerio, mate. And with that, Bob's your uncle. Oh, by the way, don't forget to watch the video that is suggested to my right.